Chapter 10. Ace was roughly shaken awake by one of the unlike, an old woman shriveled like a dried apple who scampered away when Ace sat up. She groaned and rubbed her aching back, sore and stiff from the coarse straw mattress she had slept on. Groggily she looked at her surroundings. The unlike had accommodated her in a ramshackle wooden hut built high in the branches of a tree. It was a stark contrast to the comfort of her bedroom in Kirith, and yet she felt strangely much more at ease here than she had ever done in the sumptuous splendour of the town. The curtain before the entrance was pulled back, and Aaron walked smartly in. "You slept well?" she asked. Ace had the impression that politeness wasn't one of Aaron's virtues. Before she could reply, Aaron came straight to the point. "We now have to decide what to do with you." Ace wasn't about to have her fate decided by anyone other than herself. "I have to get back to Kirith and find the Professor," she said firmly. "The Doctor is no longer in Kirith. My spies say that he was captured and taken to the harbours last night." "Oh, then that's where I'll go." "After your little adventure last night, the harbours are being patrolled by companions," Aaron stated flatly. "You wouldn't stand a chance." "Codswallop!" retorted Ace, and thought she saw the former scientist suppress a small smile. "You could help me," she said. "Indeed we could," agreed Aaron. "But why should we?" Ace angrily stood up to go, not prepared to plead for help from anyone, least of all the heartless, brutal woman before her. Aaron raised a hand to stop her. "I didn't say we wouldn't help you, Ace," she said, "but we want something in return." "What's that?" "The Darkfell has been poisoned by the Pangistri in an attempt to destroy us all. Our vegetation and foods are slowly withering away, and our rivers are contaminated with their toxins. The radiation they have bathed this area in has infected us all and is slowly killing us." "And you want the Professor's help?" Aaron nodded. "If you can guarantee that the Doctor will cure us of our sickness and make our food grow again, then we will help you. Otherwise you're on your own." Ace glowered at her, and for a second contemplated going to the harbours alone. But Aaron had told her the previous night that her people were skilled in tracking and navigation. Finally, and not without some reluctance, she agreed. Aaron smiled smugly. "Good. I will organise a small group to accompany you to the harbours." "I'm very grateful," Ace said sarcastically, and added, "Tell me, don't you ever trust anyone?" Aaron shook her head sadly. "The Kirithons did. Look what happened to them." Unaware that his assistance had just been promised to a group of people he didn't even know existed, the Doctor banged despairingly at the door of the large cell in which he, Raphael, and Myril found themselves. Shrugging his shoulders in defeat, he walked back to his companions, who were sitting despondently at a table at the far end of the room. On the way, he gave a cheery wave to the spy camera, which watched their every movement. Their prison was in a large building at the harbours, not far from the underground laboratory where Ace and Raphael had found the homunculus. It contained several cells, and when they were led past them they noticed that all of them were strangely empty. Nozzles in the ceiling of their cell revealed its occasional use as a death chamber, in which Kirithons would be gassed prior to their bodies being dissected in the Pangistri's experiments. "No luck, Doctor?" asked Myril. "Why couldn't it be a multi-ident trimonic lock, or even a logic key?" complained the Doctor, and then shook his head sadly. "Unfortunately, I've never really had much success with 5-inch titanium alloy." "It's not your fault," Raphael reassured him. "It was me who led them to you." "You'd think I'd have learned how to deal with locked doors by now," the Doctor continued, stamping his foot in frustration. "I've been in enough dungeons in my time." He looked up hopefully. "Not even a ventilation shaft," he complained. "How's a person supposed to escape?" "What do you think the Pangistri intend to do with us?" asked Myril. "Chop us up and feed us to the homunculus, I shouldn't wonder," the Doctor replied cheerfully. "Thank you for that comforting thought." The Doctor ignored Myril's sarcasm and began pacing the room. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Why are they breeding such an aggressive creature?" he asked. "There's no point to it." "Perhaps it's nothing more than a simple scientific experiment," suggested Myril. "No, everything the Pangistri do has a reason, and from what Raphael says, it's all tied up somehow with Ace." They all turned as the cell door suddenly snapped open. 3 companions, followed by Rep2, entered the room. At Reptu's command, the companions crossed over to the doctor and grabbed him roughly by the arms. The doctor turned his head away from their foul-smelling breath. "Lord Reptu, I presume. I don't think much of your hospitality," he said, and glared up at the Pangistri. Reptu ignored the criticism and bowed his head graciously. "We meet at last, Doctor." Much to his surprise, the doctor detected a note of respect in the old man's voice. "What have you done to Ace, if you've harmed her in any way?" "The Earthchild has gone to the Darkfell. We will find her eventually," replied Reptu. "In the meantime, the Grand Matriarch has decided that you are to come to Kandasi with me." The doctor's eyes narrowed suspiciously as he wondered what game the old man was playing. Whatever it was, if it gave the doctor the chance to confront the Pangistri, he was prepared to play along with it for the moment. He allowed himself to be led away peacefully by the companions. Raphael, however, lunged forward and, ignoring the doctor and Miril's protests, grabbed hold of Reptu. "Leave him alone," he demanded. "What are you going to do with him?" Reptu looked down at Raphael as one would at an irritating pet animal. He took hold of the boy's arm and squeezed it tightly. Raphael grimaced at the pressure the seemingly frail old man could exert, and Reptu pushed him aside with a contemptuous sneer. "You show great spirit, for a Kirathon," he commented simply, and followed the doctor and his captors out of the cell. As the cell door clanged shut, Raphael realised with horror just what he had done. No one had ever dared to assault a member of the Pangistri before. It was unheard of. Slowly, very slowly, Raphael began to smile. As the doctor was led out of the prison block, he plied Reptu with question after question. Reptu refused to answer any of them, merely smiling enigmatically and assuring the doctor that soon he would know everything there was to know. "You've fabricated the entire history of Kirith, haven't you?" he persisted. "That is so." There was no emotion in Reptu's voice, no attempt to defend his actions. He merely acknowledged the fact. "Somehow tampered with their minds so they remember only what you want them to." Reptu nodded. "What gives you the right to play God?" the doctor exploded, angrily shaking himself away from his guards. "What gives you the right to manipulate an entire species for your own evil ends?" Reptu stopped the companions as they tried to restrain the doctor. He knew the Time Lord's curiosity was far too great for him to make an escape attempt now. "We have every right, Doctor," he snapped back, temporarily losing his composure. "You will discover that in time." Then he recovered himself and chuckled ironically. "And no, we are most definitely not playing at God." The doctor paused and looked curiously at Reptu. For a second he appeared nothing but a tired old man, longing to relieve himself of a terrible secret burden. "You regard us as evil, Doctor. I hate and despise anyone and anything that perverts the true course of nature." There was no more to be said, and the pair continued their journey in silence. They stopped at the shore, where a ramp led down to a sleek white hovercraft moored in the bay. As they approached, its engines thrummed noisily into life, as though in welcome. Their recent disagreement apparently forgotten, Reptu showed the doctor on board with all the polite ceremony of an Edwardian gentleman inviting a colleague into his exclusive club. Only one guard accompanied them on board. The doctor examined the structure of the craft with interest. It was made of no metal known to him. He looked inquiringly at Reptu. "A living, quasi-organic substance, Doctor," he explained. "You might say it has a mind of its own." "I congratulate you on your science, Reptu," said the doctor. "But what's it all for?" "You shall find out on Kandasi," he replied. "And when shall we get there?" "We shall reach the island in a little over 20 minutes." The hatch door closed and the hovercraft broke away from its moorings, piloted by no one but itself and the mental command of Reptu. The doctor settled down into a comfortable chair, hardly noticing the craft's vibration as it flew swiftly over the waters towards the island. As they made their approach, the doctor peered through the window and the early morning drizzle to take a better look at their destination. Kandasi was a small rocky island, covered with tall dark trees and hardy shrubs. Here and there the doctor could see the few dots of white, the sheep which Reptu said were his people's main source of food. Apart from a few functional buildings on the tiny quayside, the only other structures on the island were enclosed within the walls of a small village of granite towers and buildings, built halfway up the steep wooded hill, and accessible only by a narrow winding path. Towering above everything else in the village stood an arrow-shaped totem which glinted in the sunlight. These buildings lacked the architectural beauty of those on Kirith, and seemed to have been built with permanence rather than ornamentation in mind. This, explained Reptu with a sly smile which the doctor noted, was the Skeet of Kandasi, the small monastic village where the Pangistri lived and studied. The hovercraft swept round to dock and slowed to a halt. As the doctor stood up to stretch his legs, Reptu gave a silent command to the guard. With a curious indifference, the companion raised an arm and brought its hand sharply down onto the back of the doctor's neck. The doctor crashed to the floor. Reptu stood over the unconscious form of the doctor and shook his head sadly. It was such a great pity that there were times when violence was necessary. In a fit of petulance, the scruffy little man slammed his hand down hard onto the control console and then jumped back, outraged, when the machine replied by showering him with angry sparks. Sucking his fist, he glared back at the console and then peered down at the readout on one of the digital display units. Earth again, and in the 21st century. And Australia of all places. No wonder Jamie and Victoria had stormed off to their respective quarters in a sulk, he thought sulkily. And all because just this once he couldn't quite steer the TARDIS to its programmed destination. Victoria had expressed a wish to see how her ancestors had lived in the late 16th century, and Jamie had wanted some excitement and spectacle. The little man had reasoned that if he set the TARDIS controls for both his friend Will's house in Stratford and for the Pan-Galactic Games on Alpha Centauri, he stood a 50-50 chance of arriving at one or the other. He stroked his chin thoughtfully as he called up the ship's log on a computer screen. No matter which destination he programmed into the TARDIS's flight plan, for the past 4 or 5 journeys the time machine had always returned him to Earth, dragging him further and further into that planet's future. He felt like some blessed intergalactic yo-yo. What was the reason for his machine's constant fascination for this tiny warlike planet in the back reaches of the Milky Way? If he didn't know better, he would have thought that some outside power was exerting its influence over the timeship. But of course, that was impossible. The wisp of a near-forgotten memory filtered through his mind, and he tried in vain to capture it. He dismissed it and turned to the matter in hand. One day, he promised himself, he would dust down the TARDIS manuals, if he could only remember where he had put them, and work out just how to fly this time machine of his. In the meantime, there was surely no harm in finding out what lay outside the TARDIS. Whistling cheerfully to himself, he began to look for his bucket and spade.